Welcome back, everyone. We really hope you enjoyed the partner presentations, and we're going to throw it over to Rae in a minute. She's going to be joined again by Jim Fallows, back for his second day with us on UC Central Live, and Alan Carroll. And what's going to be a little different this time is, as you've seen Jim, he is usually our moderator. He's leading the conversation. In this case, Rae is going to lead the conversation, and Alan and Jim are going to talk about the importance of storytelling through the use of story maps. Rae?
Thank you so much, Nick. It is so great to be here. Again, I am here with the Jim Fallows, founder of Our Town Civic Foundation. He was with us yesterday talking with Jack Dangermond about geojournalism. And today he's here also joined by the Alan Carroll, who is remote with us. Alan is the program manager for storytelling at Esri. And again, we're going to dive into story maps, which is an application that I personally know and love and have used to enhance my own research by bringing to life some of the things that we can't see, like that I do, like animal movement. And in fact, I always assign my students, at the undergraduate, high school, graduate level, story map tasks, because I think it's the best way to properly communicate a lot of the research that we're doing. It really helps bring home the story, behind the science that we're doing. And for those of you out there who are also users joining us, I truly hope that you have used story maps in your work. And if not, I hope that this conversation can get you really itching to do so. So I want to just dive in with our guests. Jim, can you start us off? What are your thoughts on story maps?
So first, it's a real pleasure to be here with you, and I've enjoyed so much your leadership of the conference for the last couple of days, and with my longtime friend Alan, who is in the DC area where I normally live. So in my role as a journalist learning about the mapping world, I think there are two really crucial breakthroughs that story maps have represented over the years. One is they have embodied the idea that maps are a story. Yes. And that is, Jack Dangermond and Gary Nell were talking about this last night, that we have different ways of communicating stories, and maps are a really powerful tool for that. The name itself, a story map, there's a reason for the name, and people want to record things in their lives, things they're curious about. The other thing I love about story maps is they have democratized the idea that anybody can be a cartographer.
Absolutely.
So that's, and your students, at all levels of education, people at home, people in nursing homes have been making story maps. And the idea that these are not austere tools that can only be used by the hyper professionals, but are things that are available to people. I think that's really important.
Quite universal, extremely useful in communicating the big things. And I think they cross boundaries, right? They really cross cultures, they cross age groups, they cross all these different boundaries because they're so useful. And Alan, talk to us about story maps, maybe your background. I know a little bit about how long you've been engaged with these concepts. And also, who do you often see using story maps?
Thanks, Rae, and thank you, Jim. I've been a lover of maps since I was a kid. I was a family navigator and was very, very fortunate to find myself about 20 years ago as chief cartographer at National Geographic. And so that allowed me, as the web was starting to really blossom, allowed me to start to experiment a little bit with combining maps and multimedia. But it was only after I had the great good fortune of coming to Esri about 10 and a half years ago that I really had the chance to turn those early ideas into reality. And now, of course, I've got this. I work with amazing teams of designers and developers, et cetera, that have taken story maps way beyond what I had originally imagined they could be. And it's such a thrill to know that there are now over 1.7 million story maps hosted on Esri.
Are there really?
Service. And growing.
Wow. Well, that is a really interesting statistic. We need to make sure everyone heard that one. Over 1.7 million story maps and growing. Tell us more.
I think we can add a 0 or 2 to that number, but only with the help of this amazing storytelling community.
And so are you finding, Alan, trends in which types of users are most likely to engage with story maps? Is it across the board, or are there some standout groups?
it is across a very broad board. One thing that we find thrilling is that about a third of the stories that are being created are authored by students and educators. So we're seeing story maps become one of the primary means by which young minds are exposed to the wonders of geography and the power of maps. But lots of nonprofit organizations, local and state and federal and national governments, you name it, and of course, almost every topic under the sun. Most story maps are about, of course, informing the public, inspiring the public, educating the public about important topics. But we've got it's fun to find some offbeat stories. For instance, we've found a story on habitat suitability for Bigfoot. We found a story on the travels of Indiana Jones. There's a series of story maps done by students about the travels or optimizing the route of Frodo from the Shire to Mount Doom. So pretty much everything under the sun. And what's one of the fun parts of our job is to discover these beautiful stories.
Excellent. And Jim, I know that you probably have so many reflections on why story maps are so powerful, how you've seen them used. Tell us your thoughts.
So I wonder if I could indulge on you to ask Alan a version of that question, because I've turned to him as my mentor over the years. And I'm wondering, Alan, if you have guidance about, for people who are learning story mapping, what comes first, the story or the map? And what's the main advice you would have to people going down this road? I've asked you this myself over the years, but I'm curious about how your expertise has evolved.
Boy, I could talk forever, of course, about that. But first and foremost, you have to have a very good idea of exactly what the story is that you want to tell, and who you want to reach. Who is your primary audience and secondary audience, for that matter. Another important thing about thinking about story maps is that most people think about a story in terms of, okay, I'm going to write some text and then I'm going to add some stuff to it. But with a story map, you really want to think about the whole multimedia package, of course, including perhaps first and foremost maps. But the cool thing, I think, of one of the powerful things about story maps is that the maps, of course, provide this incredible density of information and context and richness. And of course, provide the where, but also the why. But those maps can be a little bit distant and dispassionate. They appeal to the analytical and sort of more intellectual parts of our brains. But then combining those maps with photos and videos, audio, et cetera, can provide the sort of emotional impact and the appeal to the more kind of intuitive part of your brain. So you want to kind of engage the whole brain with these stories with a really rich mix of multimedia and maps.
That's such an excellent way to put it, engaging the entire brain, because sometimes our brains are really interested in the pretty pictures. Sometimes our brains really want to absorb the text. Sometimes we want to put it all together in an interesting way. And again, Alan, thank you for sharing with us that they can be very creative, right? We can make story maps about, fairy tales or, bedtime stories or, just kind of fantasy worlds, as well as making story maps about, very distinct things. I do it in my own research. I've also heard that there's a story map about this building that we're in right now. There's a lot of cool things that you can dig up, get inspired to use it on your own. What thoughts are you having right now?
So I'm thinking of story maps that have made a particular impression on me, migration paths of birds, showing how the environment that sustains migratory birds really is globally connected. You don't realize that. Well, when I'm sitting in my backyard porch in DC, seeing birds that are coming around, I'm realizing they've come thousands of miles, maybe tens of thousands of miles, and their existence is imperiled. The migrations of animals in the sea and how that's been changed by human activity. The Paul Salapak map we saw, what I thought was fascinating as well. And so, to me personally, things which connect the global to the very local, that's something that's very, very, very powerful. And I'm now going to ask you a question too. When you are teaching the youngest students to use story maps, what do you notice about the things that engage them and the things you might have to teach them to do?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I almost always emphasize story maps in a lot of my teaching and instruction. And I really find that introducing the youngest students to story maps helps them feel a little more at ease about GIS. Story maps are so familiar, they're so accessible, they're so easy to understand and read, and they're just, a beautiful way to present work. It really helps my students to feel less intimidated by the technical side of it when they see that it's going to turn out like this beautiful, very functional story that is quite engaging. And I love that. I love that it kind of lowers the stakes. It appeals to young students, and it helps them, again, I'm going to use the word intimidation. It helps them to feel less intimidated by diving into some, technical, analytical, quantitative work. And I love that. That is not coming from me. That is coming from the platform in itself. And Alan, have you seen something similar?
Absolutely. You're so right. It's really cool to see that, of course, kids being digital natives, they pick up story maps very, very quickly. Right. You don't really need, instructors don't need to instruct students about how to build a story map. So students dive into it. They get introduced to concepts of geography and this really rich world that we all inhabit. Some of them are going to leave at that point, but some of them are going to stick around. We hear lots of stories about kids who have produced a story map or two that discover through that the whole world of GIS and then really dive in, and it changes lives.
And not just students. And so I'm of a different generation from your students. In fact, we just learned that my granddaughter and your daughter go to the same school together.
The same class together. Isn't that a great connection?
Which is
story
wonderful.
Maps are in their future.
They are, but even for people of any generation, that going full on into making technical interactive maps can have a number of stumbling blocks, whereas story maps are much more forgiving as an entry point. And you say, okay, I can make things that look this way. What else could I do? So I think that is another pro story map feature.
And I'm sure, Jim, you have been in journalism for so long, and you are truly a legend in it. And you've likely seen the progression of, just text to text with images to, this multimedia, kind of multidimensional type of written journalism. And so I bet story maps are quite appealing to you.
Yes, one of my big causes is that over the time I've been in journalism, from the 1970s onward, people have become very comfortable adding photos to what they do, in print or online, and having audio and having video clips. And I think the next stage is people becoming comfortable and fluent in including mapping in what they do. The evolution of geojournalism, much to be sought and worked for it.
I think it's fantastic. And Alan, you are kind of the godfather of story maps. That's at least how I think of you. I hope you accept that compliment. Tell us, I know that there are sessions in this conference about, what's coming next with story maps, but, what would you like to say? What are some of the exciting things that you really want to convey here in this platform?
Well, I'd just like to urge people to tell their stories. We all have important stories to tell, and interesting and fun stories too. So when I come back from a vacation, my fingers itch to create a story map about it. But much more importantly, there's so many of us who are watching, so many people watching now who are doing really important work, who need to share it with a broader audience. It's great to work with your colleagues, but it's really important, especially as Jack says, since it's late in the day, we need to get the word out. We need to make people see the importance of the work we're doing, and benefit from it, and inspire people to take action. And that's what story maps are all about to me, is not just the story, but it's okay, now what? So there should be, links and buttons at the bottom of the story saying donate or volunteer or advocate, etc.
Absolutely. Final thoughts from you, Jim?
Yes, I think I'd like to tie our discussion to what Jack and Gary Nell were saying yesterday, that geographers in the broadest sense really have an important role at this moment as trustees of public knowledge. This is a medium of exchange that is least distorted by false information or by prejudice or by other sorts of biases. And it's really important for everybody in this community to think that what they do matters and changes how we all understand our world. So keep going for it would be my thought.
Keep going for it. You all heard it here from some true legends in story mapping, journalism, and you also heard it from me, a professor who assigns it all the time, but it is a very effective tool.